see. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see many of you and more still joining us for today's Library Futures event. As a quick sort of recap, in particular for those who've joined us for the first time, Library Futures is a regular event that we're running at the library, often on Zoom, but also sometimes in person, where we bring in speakers from within the library, but also from outside the library, who talk about interesting developments, usually sort of forward-looking activities in the wider library information management world that are meant to act as a bit of an inspiration and a chance for us to discuss and to think about what we're doing. And this applies in particular for today's event. And I want to use this to do a quick plug for a wider program for this, which this is in some form, maybe a very informal early kickoff. In September, we're going to start a program called Year of Games. The library is leading on this together with a range of partners across the university. The Year of Games is a year-long program aimed to sort of celebrate games and gaming from a very broad perspective, historical impact on economy, their role in research and education, and a whole host of other activities. We're partnering with the Humanities Division, the Mad Center, Western Gaming Lab, RSOs, and many other units across the campus for developing a year-long series of events, including game jams, lectures, exhibits, films, and more activities to showcase gaming resources, gaming studies, research, and teaching across the university and what is a very growing field for the university and the Humanities Division. And we're also really planning to promote game and play and fun to, in a way, sort of counter the general perception as the University of Chicago as a place where fun goes to die. Yeah, this is going to run from late September 25 until about June 26. And I'm really glad that we're joined today by Stella Wisdom, who will have a really interesting perspective that I hope will inspire our thinking. Before I introduce Stella, I just wanted to say that we are recording today's presentation, but we're not going to record the Q&A. So when Stella's finished, we stop the recording and then we can have a discussion here. And when it comes to it, you can put your questions in the chat also already during the talk, or you can raise your hands in the Q session. Yeah, so much quickly for the context of today. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Stella Wisdom, who is a digital curator for contemporary British collections at the British Library. Although, Stella, I've always thought of you as the games curator at the British Library. I had the pleasure of working with Stella for a few years and have always been inspired by, I think, your energy and I think the really broad perspective that you've brought to widening the collection of the National Library. So Stella specializes in digital storytelling, including the collection and curation of webcomics and interactive narratives. They collaborate widely and have partnered with AdventureX, the National Videogame Museum, the New Media Writing Prize, the International Games Month in libraries, and also Lancaster University's Litcraft initiative, which builds immersive literary worlds in Minecraft. Yeah, and so it's my great pleasure to have you here and for a chance for us to learn from you from more than a decade of work in collecting material that for some people might feel a bit out of the scope of libraries, and to give us a broader insight into your work and your wonderful programming at the British Library. So over to you, Stella.
Thanks so much, Torsten. That was a very nice introduction. I'm going to share my screen. So let's... Sorry if it's a bit slow. Let me just start sharing my slides. So can everyone see my slides okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. That's good. Right. Thanks everyone for inviting me along today. I'm going to go on a bit of a whistle-stop tour of several projects that I've worked on over the years. But I thought I'd start first of all, really with a kind of introduction to the British Library. I just want to check that everyone can see the full slide and there's not like a panel obscured at the side.
We can see it.
You can see all of it, great. So I just wanted to kind of really start off just with a quick intro of the British Library, basically to mostly say that it's more than books. We've got a lot of books. We've got over 13.5 million printed books and ebooks, but we've got vast archives and manuscript collections. We've got everything from kind of Jane Austen to the Beatles. We've got patents, newspapers, maps, sound recordings, including a radio archive, philatelic collections, and increasingly lots and lots of digital collections, including the UK Web Archive that we've been collecting under electronic legal deposit since 2013. So the picture you can see here is the King's Tower. So for anyone who's visited the British Library, this is a kind of iconic central feature inside the library, with the collection of George III's books in there. And a photo of a different tower is inside one of our storage warehouses in Yorkshire. So I should also mention that the British Library has a site in Yorkshire. The collections are growing at a phenomenal rate. So they grow by 8 kilometres every year. They occupy over 750 kilometres of shelving. It's kind of mind-boggling. I should mention this is the inside of a warehouse before we've added the collections in, so you can see the racking before the totes have gone in. But basically, it's impossible to try and see the collection of the British Library. If you were to look at 5 items a day, it would take one person 80,000 years. So it's just kind of mind-blowing thinking of the scale of the collections. The British Library's kind of mission is to make our intellectual heritage accessible for everyone, for research, inspiration and enjoyment, and that's all kinds of audiences. So everything from our kind of work with schools as part of our learning program, but also with business communities and helping kind of businesses grow and flourish, as well as kind of more traditional roles as kind of being custodians of the collections and kind of organising cultural programming. So I'm going to talk about some of my projects because Torsten says he kind of really sees me as a games curator, but I didn't start off at the British Library ever thinking that I would kind of work with games. And what really started my journey working with games was the Off the Map competition. So back in 2012, I went to a digital preservation conference in Cardiff, and I went along to the conference really kind of thinking about web archiving, archiving personal digital archives, that kind of thing. But it was in the lunch break at this conference that I got chatting to a couple of folks who were involved with games preservation. So this was Professor James Newman at Bath Spa University and Ian Simons, who used to run Game City Festival in Nottingham. And James and Ian had kind of collaborated on many initiatives, but really kind of interested in kind of games as culture. And so they kind of said to me, does the British Library collect games? Does the British Library do anything with games? If not, are you interested? And at that point, I wasn't aware of any British Library initiative with games, but I was open-minded. And they said, we organise a competition for student game designers, but up until this date, it's not had any kind of theme or topic pulling it together. Do you think British Library's digitised collections could be used to inspire game designers? And I said, that's a great idea. Why don't we give it a go? And so we kind of came up with a competition called Off the Map. And from my point of view, it was an opportunity to engage with new audiences. It was an opportunity for games design students in the United Kingdom to showcase their talents to industry. And really, it was a great opportunity to see how digitised collections of analogue collections could be creatively reused. I should also point out, James and Ian did show me some student games and interactive environments, including this wonderful digital reconstruction of Roslin Chapel, which is up in Scotland near Edinburgh. And they showed me some playthrough videos on YouTube, and they really kind of made me aware of kind of what could be created. So I just wanted to kind of mention that I was inspired by seeing kind of other examples. So Off the Map, the first Off the Map competition I spoke to my colleague Tom Harper, who's curator of antiquarian mapping, and Tom selected some items that he thought could be fantastic inspiration for creating games. And we chose a theme of London before and after the Great Fire of London, and Tom picked out maps like this. So you can see here what was London Bridge. London Bridge doesn't exist in London anymore, but this is a kind of wonderful kind of view of this from 1616. It's so detailed, you can even see the kind of heads on spikes at the end of the bridge. Lots of other kind of details here, and also maps like this. So this map here of London shows the area that was destroyed in the Great Fire of London. So you can see quite a vast area, and you can see in the cartouche at the top London ablaze. So we've got these kind of wonderful historic maps in the British Library collection that are all out of copyright and digitized, and we thought they'd be great for a student games design competition. I'm going to actually come out of the slides now and show you a video, so hopefully this swap over works. So are you seeing the video? I'm going to start pressing play. So I hope that hopefully I'm back on my
Yes.
slide deck now. So I just wanted to kind of show you a video of Pudding Lane Productions, which was the winning entry for the first Off the Map competition. What we should bear in mind is that this was created in 2012. So at the time, this looked really very sophisticated, and they used Crytek's CryEngine software to make this kind of immersive, explorable world. What I also wanted to mention, so this was a kind of experimental project for me, but because basically the winning entry really kind of captivated people, it did end up getting quite a decent amount of press coverage at the time, including on kind of BBC Click, which is kind of the BBC's technology programme. And I had a 6-minute feature on the competition, which I wasn't fully expecting, but which was very kind of welcome at kind of showing the students' work. So this was judged, I had to kind of confess to kind of senior managers what I'd been doing after getting it featured on the BBC. But then I was allowed to run the competition again, and it became an annual competition for a few years. So we had But what I did from following years after the first competition was then tie it into British Library exhibitions. So the following year we had an off-the-map Gothic competition because we had a Gothic exhibition happening at the library. You can see here a view of Fonthill Abbey. Fonthill Abbey doesn't exist anymore. This was quite a ridiculous building. You can see this central tower. It was so ridiculous. It actually it fell down twice and kind of Beckford, who kind of owned this building, it had it built once, but then nothing exists anymore after it collapsed a second time. There isn't even any ruins of Fonthill, but we've got these wonderful kind of like I say, engravings of Fonthill. What I also started to do for future competitions was put the digitized assets onto Wikimedia Commons to make them openly available. Like I mentioned, they were all out of copyright, so we put kind of high resolution images up on Wikimedia Commons. And also the students wanted to use sound effects in their games, and I realized there was a risk that students might be tempted to break audio copyright by just kind of using any information that they found. So I spoke to my colleague Cheryl Tipp, who is Wildlife and Industrial Sounds Curator, working with sound archive collections at the British Library. And we also started finding some sound effects where the library owned the copyright. So you can see here examples of like weather sounds. We've got animal recordings and other things like that. So I started creating thematic audio playlists and putting them on SoundCloud to be reused in these games as well. I'm not going to play videos for all of these because I will run out of time, and I want to talk about a few other things. But the off the map Gothic competition, the winners came from University of South Wales. They actually made a VR game called Nyx, where you rebuild Fonthill, and by collecting glowing orbs. What you're doing in this, it's quite clever because they've used the kind of seasickness effect of kind of early VR, and you're playing the game as if you're swimming around underwater in like a kind of murky pond, chasing these glowing orbs. And every time you catch a nyx, so the glowing orbs are called nyxes, you build part of Fonthill, and then when you've built all of Fonthill, you can go and explore the interior of it. So I've just put some kind of URLs for YouTube clips, which are all still online. We then had an Alice in Wonderland competition. So again, we linking in with an exhibition. I just wanted to mention that Alice's Adventures Underground, so the manuscript, Lewis Carroll's manuscript of Alice in Wonderland, where he himself did the illustrations, so this is kind of before the Tenniel illustrations, is one of our treasures. And we had an Alice in Wonderland exhibition at the library. So we had a competition, a game making competition off the map to go inside with that. What I really loved with this winning entry is the student team actually built their game world with the digitized items. So you can see here where you can see the white rabbit, and it's running over the kind of digitized pages, and you can see that the kind of platform level is kind of stacks of books. So if I'd got more time, I'd play you a clip, but like I say, there are clips on YouTube of this, but really kind of inventive games being created. However, off the map, really, it was kind of for higher education games students in the UK, so quite limited in a way. So I wanted people were kind of contacting me saying, well, we like making games, but we're not a student registered at a university. Can we participate in off the map? And sadly, they couldn't in off the map. But what I then thought about was doing some game jams. So I collaborated with one of my good friends, Ashley Green, who then was working in Surrey libraries. So this was a kind of partnership between a public library in the UK and the British Library. And we held a couple of online game jams where anyone in the world could participate. So we first of all did one themed on water called the Odyssey Jam. And what we encouraged people to do was to use digitized 19th century book illustrations that are all available on Flickr. So the British Library released over 1 million out of copyright book illustrations. So all out of copyright, and people could use them. So we had Odyssey Jam. There was a modest amount of success. There was 10 entries, which I think was probably not bad for a first attempt at an online game jam. But then riffing from that, I kind of reused the Gothic theme that I'd done a couple of years earlier with the Gothic off the map competition, and we held a Gothic novel jam, and this was pretty successful. This had 46 entries. People, I don't know whether people know much about kind of free online game making tools. I've not got time to talk about them now, but I did want to kind of mention Bitsy and Twine. So some of the people who made kind of interactive narratives and games for these game jams used Twine and Bitsy, and I just wanted to kind of give a couple of examples. So if anyone's inspired after seeing my talk today and wants to check a couple of these entries out, that they're available online. So I just from here, you can see one of the entries as a globe brings out a haze, and you can really see how the kind of book illustrations were used in this work. And another example is the Lady's Book of Decency, and I really like this. So this is kind of riffing on Victorian books of etiquette, but you're basically playing as a werewolf. So you can see here it looks like a kind of old book, and there's the kind of illustration going around, but it is kind of got a kind of horror comedy element, where you're kind of playing as a werewolf in this game. In addition to my competitions and the game jams, is other colleagues were starting to become interested in this kind of creative reuse of digitized collections and how we could kind of use them to kind of celebrate the collections. So colleagues in Yorkshire and worked with a game studio, Invisible Flock, and they did a project called Faint Signals, and so this is a kind of interactive woodland, but it's using, I've mentioned our sound archive collections, our audio collections of wildlife sounds. So this is kind of an interactive kind of forest where you walk through, and it uses all the kind of weather and wildlife sounds in the immersive forest. So like I say, this was a commission rather than a competition, but it was really great to see colleagues also kind of being inspired to kind of work with partners on immersive projects like this. I also got to know academics who use basically game making in education. So Professor Andrew Byrne has retired now, but Professor Andrew Byrne used to work at the Institute of Education at University College London. He and his team developed some game making software for children to use in English lessons in the classroom. And we worked on a project called Mission Maker Beowulf. So on the next slide, you can see here an image of the Beowulf manuscript. I should mention, if it looks a bit charred around the edges, that's because it was in a fire, but the fire was in the 18th century, so well before it got to the British Library. But the Beowulf manuscript, again, like the Alice manuscript, is one of our treasures, and it was great to see in the Mission Maker project it being used. So Mission Maker is some software that can be used in the classroom, but also at kind of festivals or any kind of workshops with young people. And what they do is they create their own basically interactive gameplay versions based on the poem Beowulf. If anyone's interested in more of this, Andrew has published a book, Literature, Video Games and Learning, and there's a couple of chapters about the projects in there. Another educational games project that also kind of, I suppose because I'd been doing the off-the-map competition and the game jams, it's academics who, like I say, using game technology, were then starting to get in touch with me, was Professor Sally Bushell at Lancaster University. Sally is a specialist in 19th century literature, so kind of Wordsworth and Coleridge and those kinds of things. But Sally basically became interested in how Minecraft can be used in the classroom, because she adopted a child and bonded with her adopted child through playing Minecraft together. And then Sally, like I say, became interested in kind of building worlds in Minecraft that, again, could be used to teach literature. So I'll just mention a few examples of this. So the Litcraft project started really building literary islands, and I suppose with islands they're nice and self-contained. So they built Treasure Island, and they did Robinson Crusoe and the Swiss Family Robinson. I've just got some more slides of another children's book, Kensuke's Kingdom by Michael Morpurgo. So you can see on the right the map from in the book, and then on the left the the island in Minecraft. But what Litcraft does is it's designed to be used to kind of accompany the book. So children read the story, read the book, but then go into the game world, and they have tasks. So there is kind of reading and writing in-game tasks in the Litcraft environment, and it's especially Sally has really been kind of pioneering it with reluctant readers, so children who might not usually enjoy reading, and to try to get them passionate about reading. It's been really a real pleasure to kind of participate into this project. I've just got a bit of a teaser here. So this is the latest Litcraft build. So Litcraft, like I say, started off building islands, but they've now actually built 19th century London in Minecraft, using lots of detailed mapping, historic mapping, so gold insurance maps, but also the booth poverty maps. And you can see here a still from the 19th century Litcraft build. You can see St. Paul's Cathedral there. We had, and it's available to explore in VR as well. And you can see a still from an event that I had at the British Library in November 2023, where we gave some kind of early demos for people at an event to come and explore 19th century London in Litcraft. I could talk more about this. I've not got time, but they've actually plotted all of the Sherlock Holmes stories into this Litcraft environment of London. So it's really quite amazing and ripe for educational use. So I've mentioned events, and the event where I showed the Litcraft 19th century London. Over the years, I've done quite a lot of kind of events with games partners, including the AdventureX convention. So this is a convention that takes place in the UK. It's had various homes over the years, but for 2 years we held it at the British Library. What's really nice is it focuses on games writers and narrative games. So a real kind of nice tie-in with the library. But I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to other kind of partner organisations where I've kind of worked with on events. I've held a couple of fringe events for the London Games Festival, again looking at writing for games and games and literature. I've held events for International Games Week in libraries, which is an American Libraries Association initiative, but it's global. So that's been a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed organising events with them. One year I actually poached Wordplay, so you can see their logo in the top right. So Wordplay is normally takes place in Toronto, but for 1 year only, I poached it from Toronto, and we had it at the British Library in London, and we had a kind of showcase of lots of narrative playable games at the BL for Wordplay. And I've also done a lot of work with the New Media Writing Prize. So this is like an annual competition. They have various categories, including a journalism category, a student category, encouraging kind of experimental writing with new technology. And I've worked with them over the years. And in recent years, we've been partnering with them to collect and archive the shortlisted and winning entries of the New Media Writing Prize. So that kind of leads me to go on. So I just wanted to talk for the last kind of maybe 5-10 minutes. So what I kind of started out with was looking at how digitized images and sounds could be creatively reused by games makers with the competitions and the jams and the events that I've did. But in recent years, I've been involved in what we call emerging formats research and collecting. So really, so the British Library is a legal deposit library. We have a remit to collect every publication in the United Kingdom, both print and digital. The emerging formats research is basically looking at digital publications that are kind of not standard. So we're not thinking kind of EPUBs or kind of PDFs or kind of standard ebooks. We're thinking things that are more experimental and kind of the future of publishing, and books as mobile apps or web-based interactive narratives and kind of digital comics and that kind of thing. This is not business as usual. It really is kind of still a bit R&D, but we are collecting material. And in 2023, we had an exhibition, Digital Storytelling, where we showcased some of the works that we had collected or that we are interested in collecting. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we featured in this exhibition. So the point of this exhibition was to basically, I suppose, show to the public and involve the public and say, look, we are looking at basically future collecting and curation. We're interested in how writers are using digital technologies to tell different stories. So how does digital technology change the way writers write and the experience of readers? And we used 11 different stories that all kind of respond differently to kind of illustrate what we're interested in. Some of these interactive narratives. What I should mention is we didn't split it into different sections, but we did try to select some works that were interactive narratives, some works that used kind of location-based storytelling, and I'll give an example of that shortly, and also story worlds, or some people will refer to this as transmedia, except our exhibitions team thought that the general public might not understand what transmedia means, so we use the word story worlds, and really that's kind of storytelling across media. So if you're kind of looking at story worlds like Star Wars and Doctor Who and Marvel, all of those are kind of transmedia story worlds examples, but we chose something a bit more independent in our exhibition. I'm going to romp through these. The 11 works that we featured. So first in the exhibition was 80 Days by Inkle, which is an interactive retelling of Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. It's been completely rewritten by Meg Jayanth. You play as Passepartout, and you do, the aim of the game is to try to win the wager and travel around the world. You visit different places. You have to go and buy and sell items at market, manage your budget, find timetables and maps, and kind of interact with characters in the game, and kind of navigate your route. It's available on Steam and iPad, Android, so it's available as a mobile app. It's also now available on the Nintendo Switch, and you can see here on the right some nice kind of ephemera that accompanied the limited edition Switch edition. So we put those in the gallery as well, because we love the postcards, but also the comb, if you can see the comb, because in the game you have to kind of keep Phileas Fogg happy, and you can do that by kind of combing his hair and things like that. So we loved the kind of items from the limited edition. Another work featured in digital storytelling was Breathe by Kate Pullinger. This is a ghost story to be read on a smartphone. It actually works through a mobile browser, so it's not an app. It's a mobile work. You can play this for free. I've put the link there. So breathe, breathestory.com. This does use location, so this uses data feeds from the phone, and you can see a screenshot here, the middle one, where it says, however, bedtime was a while ago. Where am I? Here in London, West London, Shepherd's Bush. If you were to read this story and you've got location switched on and you've granted permissions for this, it would personalize that screen to say wherever you are. And also in the game, it invites you to take a photo of your surroundings, so that kind of interplays with the story, and it also, the game knows whether you're warm or cold. So really, Breathe is meant to kind of have a really kind of uncanny effect, because the story knows things about you and knows where you are. Windrush Tales was a game, it's still in development, so this is not widely available, but we had an early playable demo. I was very keen to feature this in the exhibition, because it was in 2013, sorry, 2023, it was the 75th anniversary of the Empire Windrush docking in London, and the kind of first generation Windrush migrants to the UK. So Windrush Tales is in development by Threefold Games. It's a really nice narrative, and the illustrations are all these like kind of lovely like watercolor illustrations, and it's told through going through a photo album, and you kind of go through and read the stories of the characters, and you can select different pictures. But we had an early playable demo. What's really nice about this game is they've been doing workshops with people who like I say, elders in the Caribbean community who migrated in like I say, at the time of the Empire Windrush, but also their descendants. So they've been kind of telling people stories through this game. So it's a pleasure to include that in the gallery. I know I'm probably going to run out of time, so I'm going to romp on a little bit. We included some examples of kind of data visualization journalism. So I just wanted to mention Dictionary of the Revolution. This won the New Media Writing Prize a couple of years ago. So Amira did interviews with people on the streets of Cairo. After the kind of Arab Springs uprising, you can click on the transcripts, but there's a wheel, so you can see this on the right, and you can select the words going around this, and then open different transcripts and kind of read different stories. It's a kind of very powerful work. You can read it in Arabic and in English, and we put that out in the gallery for people to explore. Another New Media Writing Prize winning entry that we included was See You Later by Dan Hett, also with a kind of powerful real life story. So Dan sadly lost his brother in the Manchester Arena terrorist attack bombings, and he's done three works about his personal experiences of grief and losing his brother. But See You Later has been created with Twine, so it's a purely text-based work, and it's a hypertext work. You click on the different sentences in blue light you can see here. It goes through the night that the attack happened and all of his thought processes, because he's wondering what's happened to his brother. He's just starting to see news on social media. People are trying to phone him, and it goes through that awful kind of first 24 hours after the attack and all his kind of thought processes. So we put that in. What's interesting is with most Twine narratives you can go backwards, but with this one you can only go forwards, and Dan did that deliberately because obviously in the real world he could not go backwards and save his brother. So real powerful work. We also showcased running app, Zombies Run. So this is by Six to Start and Naomi Alderman. This is an audio narrative that you listen to while you're running. We couldn't put a treadmill sadly in the gallery, but we had a video footage of people running in different environments, and we had this so you could listen to a mission on headphones and imagine that you're running, and you can see the kind of developers of this there. I know I'm running out of time. I am getting through it. I mentioned transmedia and story worlds. So Clockwork Watch was our example that we did to kind of showcase story worlds. So Clockwork Watch is a kind of reinterpreted Victorian narrative, looking at it feels quite relevant in today. So it's looking at automatons called the clocks, and people are worried that they're taking their jobs. It's told through live action kind of role play immersive theatre style events. You can see a photo at the bottom and also an illustration. So they have these one-off immersive theatre style events where people dress up. Members of the public are also invited to participate in the storytelling that's happened, and then after these events they're drawn up into comics and published as graphic novels. This doesn't seem very digital, but what I should also mention is there is a website linking up the plot and the narrative between the graphic novels and the events, the London Gazette. So it's a website, so it's a modern website to kind of get people up to speed with the story, but it looks like a 19th century newspaper. And when we had the exhibition, we had one of the Clockwork Watch events at the library. We had over 500 people at a big steampunk party, and you can see here chap hop musician Professor Elemental, who was performing when we had the Clockwork Watch immersive event at the library. The event at the library was a property auction for people bidding to buy properties in the sky. So that was the next part of the narrative in that story. Other examples, we included Astrologaster. This is one of my favourite works we showed. This is an Elizabethan medical history comedy. It's about a real life historical character. You can see here Dr. Simon Foreman. He was essentially a kind of quack doctor. He was desperate to get his medical license, and you play the game, treating patients and consulting the stars, reading the stars, giving them diagnosis. And the aim of the game is to get as many kind of positive recommendations to hopefully get your license to be a legitimate doctor. Some of the game, actually, you're turning the pages and it's like a virtual pop-up book. Again, it's available on Nintendo Switch and Steam, and also kind of Apple for to play on an iPad. What I loved about this is they again, there's a kind of creative reuse element. They used the digitized Simon Forman manuscripts that are in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University. These have been digitized by Cambridge University, and they're all available online as a digital edition. So a kind of great example of a game studio reusing a digitized archive to create their work. We included other examples. You probably wouldn't think of this as a game, but it is interactive poetry. So this is a picture of Wind by J.R. Carpenter. This used data feeds, weather data feeds. So the text in blue changes based on wind speed. This was interesting because we had to kind of fix this work to connect to a different data source because the original data source for this work had stopped working. So it just shows the kind of vulnerability of digital works. But we got this working with wind speed data from the UK Met Office, and it's a side scroller, so you can scroll through the months, read the poetry. The poetry in black stays static, but the words in blue change based on the wind speed. Coming to an end nearly. Seed is a biographical work. Again, it's designed to be read on a smartphone, a bit like Breathe. So this was developed with Editions at Play, same as Breathe was. This is a kind of autobiographical memoir of the writer's teenage years. And what you could do is you click on the different plants and you open up little kind of vignettes of memoirs. There's also a printed edition with very different artwork. So we exhibited the slipcase and the kind of printed pamphlets of the memoirs alongside the digital work. Both are very beautiful in their own ways, but quite different. And we also included a literary adaptation that's been adapted for VR, so Wolves in the Wall by Fable. So this is based on the storybook by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. We sadly couldn't include the VR in the gallery because of space and health and safety considerations. But what we did is we made a playthrough video of the work and showcased that alongside the book. And what I did want to mention is for this exhibition, we did interview several of the creatives talking about their work, explaining how they wrote it and how they created it. So we interviewed them about the works and had these alongside the playable works. And for several of the works, we also created playthroughs, and we worked with a PhD placement student, Florence Smith-Nicol, who you can see here in the VR headsets and hand controllers. And Florence helpfully made us playthrough videos of like I say, Wolves in the Walls, but also 80 Days and Astrologaster, so we could kind of have those. And what's brilliant is after the exhibition, we've got the interviews and the playthrough videos, and we've added them to our research repository. So there's a life after the exhibition, and anyone interested in these interactive works, we've got, like I say, interviews with creatives and playthrough videos that have become new research resources about these interactive works for future researchers. So that's my last slide, and I'm going to stop sharing. So thank you very much.